Got it. Read the title of what I'm going to be showing tonight is called Pandemic Diary. And I'll explain that in a minute. I will just tell you quickly who I am. I'm a retired lawyer. I have been involved in photography. I guess I started in the late 1970s when I bought my first SLR camera, and then a friend had a black and white darkroom that he wanted to sell, so I bought that, and I played around with that a lot. And I've been photographing ever since. My wife and I have done lots of traveling around the world. We've been to actually 67 countries, some of them more than once, and I always had cameras with me. And two of my great passions, especially since I retired, are photography and biking. I'm on my bike 3-4 days a week. And in fact, we've taken 18 biking trips around the world. So what happened was, back in March of 2020, when COVID was really rampant, the city locked down, as you may recall. Social distancing was required, masks were required, businesses were closed, stores were closed. It was really a chaotic and unprecedented time in all of our lives. The day after the city shut down, I decided that I would start going around either on foot or on my bike and just photographing what was life like. And I was going to do that every couple days. And I sent the first set of about 5 or 6 photos out by email to about 8 friends. I got into it, and it got more interesting as time went on. And so I continued doing it throughout the pandemic period in from March of 2020 into the middle part of 2021 when it was finished. And I've continued now chronicling life in and around the city ever since. Through word of mouth, I now have 47 people who I share these with, and I put up maybe 5 or 6 photos on a posting 1 day a week, sometimes 2 days a week, depending upon what's going on, what I'm seeing, what I'm finding. But the city during the pandemic was really weird. And I don't know that we remember how weird it was. And I didn't until I went back and started going through all my photographs to prepare for tonight. So I'm just going to start out. I have a quick synopsis of each photograph and the dates of when it was taken, and you can see what was going on. And we're starting here with March 17th, 2020, shortly after the lockdown started. This is 11:51 in the morning, looking east on Walnut Street from 18th Street. And there was just hardly anybody out. Then the same day, if you know the Park Restaurant on Rittenhouse Square, it is always jumping. It has people all over the place. It was shut tight as a drum. This was Rittenhouse Square at noon that day. There was nobody out. And it was really weird walking around being the only person doing it. It was wonderful for biking because there was no car traffic. Now we're jumping ahead. This is April. The first store in the area that decided to shut down was this food market at 20th and Spruce. And they shut down and they boarded up and they posted a sign out front saying, "We want to keep our employees safe. We're concerned about the health hazards of them dealing with the public coming in." And so they shut down and boarded up overnight with no warning. That was the first of the shutdowns. Now, about 5 or 6 days later, this is April 8th, and we are looking west on Walnut Street in the 1700 block of Walnut Street at 4:30 in the afternoon. And as you can see, just nothing was out there. Same day, this is looking south on 19th Street, sorry. Looking south from Market down to Chestnut. It was so empty that people were out jogging on the streets without any concern about being run over. And even at night, it was even quieter. This is Walnut Street in the 1800 block, the north side of Rittenhouse Square. About 7 o'clock, nobody was out. On April 12th, I took a bike ride up to the Penn campus. If you've ever been on Locust Walk at 2:30 in the afternoon, which is when this was, there was one person down there who I think was a homeless guy. There were no people out. There were no students. There were no pedestrians, nothing. This was the lobby of the Kimmel Center that same day. Nobody was there. Nothing was happening. Tickets weren't being sold. A few days later, I biked out to Upper Darby, and the Tower Theater was shut. And if you recall, at the time, everybody was really conscious of the fact that doctors and nurses and first responders were putting themselves on the line. They were out dealing with people who had what we considered to be a fatal illness, and which was killing people and making them sick. So the Tower Theater, which was shut, had this sign up there to thank the first responders. Now, we are on April 14th at 3:07 in the afternoon. This was the Benjamin Franklin Parkway. Nothing. It was eerie. It was otherworldly. The train station, nobody was there. There were some trains scheduled to run, but there were no passengers. There were no taxis lined up outside. It was a ghost place. I took a ride out a few days later to Ballackinwood. This was the parking lot of the Lord & Taylor store in the Ballackinwood Shopping Center. Nobody there. That store actually, I don't think ever recovered from the pandemic because it's been shut ever since. But the suburbs were the same. City Hall. This is the south side of City Hall at 5:17 p.m. on April 20th. Usually there are cars lined up everywhere. And as you can see, there was a bus. I don't know if anybody was getting on buses in those days, but it was a ghost town. Subways, the Broad Street line, closed. You'll see the only people that were living we're going down there were homeless people seeking shelter where they could be with nobody bothering them because the trains weren't running and there were no passengers. This is the Locust Walnut subway station, which is usually just humming with people. This was 5:06 in the afternoon, usually rush hour, not a soul. There were, I think, some trains running. I don't even remember. So what happened after that? On April 23rd, some of the stores decided that there was no business. They wanted to protect themselves. Nothing bad had happened yet, but the city started boarding itself up. And so the Boyd's store boarded up its windows on April 23rd. There was, you may recall, on April 18th, the military did a flyover of the city just to give people something to come outside for and look up at the sky and feel good about. And so these military jets, I think it was the Blue Angels, circled around the city for about an hour. And it got people out. This is from the roof of my building, but it was one of the few things that actually drew people outside during all of this. Now, where things got really interesting was May 30th. This was shortly after George Floyd was killed. And there was a peaceful demonstration in his memory at City Hall in the afternoon. This was 11:50 in the afternoon in front of City Hall. And that night, things went berserk. At about 9 o'clock that night, from the roof of my building, I could see these huge flames on Walnut Street, just a block or two away. And it wasn't really a political riot. It was a vandalism and theft riot. The next morning, this is what that block of the 1700 block of Walnut Street looked like. This is May 31st, 2020. And it was a disaster. Every store up and down there was looted and vandalized. This building on the right here, which housed stores, was burnt. All 3 floors were burnt out. It's a huge fire. And the next morning, well, I'm sorry, this is still it. That same morning while I was out there, I was looking at stores. I forget, this was a woman's store. I forget this was. This might be the Old Navy store. Was totally trashed and looted. All of this happened after the George Floyd peaceful demonstrations. And that morning, while we were standing out there, people were just walking into Modell's sporting goods stores and walking out with as much stuff as they could carry. And nobody was stopping them. There were police around there. They didn't stop them. People were pulling cars up in front of the stores, going in, loading up as much as they could carry, and loading it into their cars. And nothing happened. Nothing was done. There's another guy bringing out everything he could carry from that same store, which finally recently, 4 years later, has opened up as a clothing store, but it's been empty for most of that time. Another store, this might be the Old Navy store. I'm not so sure. But you can see there was no political motive to it. It was just vandalism and rioting and arson. And it happened in different places around the city, but I think it was most acute on Walnut Street and some on Chestnut Street. This is a Dunkin' Donuts at 16th and Sansom. Why people set stuff inside the Dunkin' Donuts on fire, I don't know, but this is where they dumped everything the next morning. And right across the street from that is a very popular marathon restaurant. This is what was left of it the next morning. Every window broken, glass all over the place inside. They were shut for weeks after this. It was really traumatic stuff. Walking around was an otherworldly experience. You read about this happening who knows where, but never think about it happening in downtown Center City, Philadelphia. Now, a few weeks later, I was able to go up to a high floor on a building that overlooked where that fire site was on Walnut Street. And right, Walnut Street is out there. And you can see how violent that fire was and what it took to put it out. Eventually, that was all leveled. It sat there as an empty lot for a long time. It's now operating as an outdoor restaurant. It was closed for the winter, but it'll reopen again soon. But the place was totally burnt to a crisp. The CVS store at 19th and Chestnut, from what I understand, is one of the most profitable CVS stores in all of the country. This is what it looked like the next morning. I'm surprised there was anything left on the shelves. And across the street from that, also a block away, is a TD Bank. What people thought they could get by breaking into a bank, I don't know, but it was trashed. And then buildings started to board up and either try to cover up the damage or prevent any further damage. This was the shops at Liberty Place along Chestnut Street. You'll see them later. The Target store at 19th and Chestnut, which was trashed and ransacked, was boarded up, and there were police stationed outside there for a long time. This was taken, let me just check my dates, taken sometime around June, I think. It was still boarded up. The Jacobs music store had a lot of expensive pianos in the window. They weren't stolen, but they were trashed, they were ransacked, they were thrown over, they were out on the sidewalk. It was very, very alarming. Now, This is a little bit later. This is on early June, and there were some anti-police demonstrations going on. There were Black Power demonstrations going on. This was June 2nd in front of the Municipal Services Building. And I was there. Nobody knew if it was going to stay peaceful, which it did. There was a lot of back and forth between the crowd and the police, but it was, at least it remained peaceful. A day or two later, this is June 6th, a large Black Lives Matter demonstration on the Art Museum steps. Also, I was going to these places wondering, are they going to be safe? They were safe. There were people peacefully demonstrating. There were not, other than that one night, May 30th, of the rioting and the arson and the looting, there wasn't any real violence in the city thereafter. Now, some of you may remember that in June, an encampment of homeless people was created along the parkway, and they set up tents. They had food, they had toilets, they had bathroom, they had people cleaning up. It was a very peaceful but very large homeless encampment, and the city really didn't know what to do with it, and they couldn't figure out what to do with it. They were afraid if they went in and tried to, by force, get rid of it, it would cause some sort of violence. So it stayed there. After a while, the sanitation started to get pretty bad, and the city decided they were going to have to do something about it, but that's later. In the meantime, in June, if you'll recall, there was a large movement to get rid of this Christopher Columbus statue along Broad Street in South Philly, because of the way that he was perceived to have treated the local Native Americans unfairly. And there were demonstrators around it. There were police around it, kind of facing off at each other for days at a time. And the city really couldn't figure out what to do about it. First, they were going to move it, but the people that supporting the statue weren't going to let that happen. So in a burst of brilliant bureaucratic thinking, they decided they would put a box around it. So the statue stayed there, but it was boxed up, which was sort of a compromise that people somehow lived with. And it was boxed for a long time. Eventually, it got unboxed and it's still there, but it sat like this for over a year. Now we're getting back to what the city was looking like. This is weeks after the rioting. Let me just get my numbers right. We're into November and October, and stores were still boarded up because they were concerned about whether things were going to blow up again or not. Some of them were open. A lot of them just stayed shut. This is the entire Chestnut Street side of the Liberty Place shops in Center City, which looked like this for a long time. And same thing with Old Navy. They just decided they didn't want to risk being open or being looted. So they stayed closed like this for months and months and months. The Marathon restaurant that I showed you that was so trashed looked like this for months. Center City was a boarded up ghost town for a long time. At some point, some of the stores decide, well, at least we can decorate the boards, the facades that we've created. And they started having the mural arts program and other local artists decorate them. They weren't open, but at least they were doing what they could to cheer up the streets a little bit. And some of them looked like this. There were some very creative and artistic, they weren't murals, they were temporary installations that were very well done. Now we're back to the housing demonstration. The city said, we are going to come in and we are going to dismantle that housing encampment. And the people who were there and the supporters who were there knew what day this was supposed to happen. And so they erected these barricades. They started to try to get the police to leave. They were outfitted for battle. These are what some of them are wearing: helmets and shields, and nobody had any weapons that I saw, but they were not about to let the encampment be removed by force. So the police decided they weren't going to do anything. They stood around for a while. Remember everybody wearing masks? They're still wearing masks then. They stood around and eventually they left. It took a while, but there was a resolution negotiated between the homeless encampment and their leaders in the city that convinced the people in the encampment that the city was going to create new free or low-cost housing for them, either in those little mini houses or places like that. From what I understand, that really hasn't happened because every place they wanted to put them, neighbors objected and their zoning didn't allow it. So, as you know, if you walk around Center City, the unhoused population is as great, if not greater, than ever. I probably have 100 photographs of people who are on the streets or sleeping on the streets with nowhere to go. And it's not Philadelphia, it's every city. Now, the CVS stayed boarded up even though it was open. We're into basically November here. I mean, the Target store. And you could go in there and shop, but you couldn't see what was in there, and nothing that was glass was exposed to possible rioting. The CVS was open. You could go in there, actually. Those center doors are electric doors, and they open, and you could walk up to them and they would open, but you couldn't tell from the outside that they were in business. And this remained that way, a lot of these places, for a long time to avoid any more looting or arson. Then things started to look up. This is November 3rd, 2020. It was election day, and people came out to vote. This is, well, I forget where this was, 21st Street. People were lined up as far as you could see. Everybody was wearing masks. This was another voting booth, another voting place on 24th Street. People lined up and the voting went smoothly and it continued all day. You may recall that Philadelphia was considered to be an epicenter of how that election was going to go. And again, this was when Biden and Trump were running. So outside of the Kimmel Center, where there was a large voting booth, cameras and reporters from all over were stationed, reporting all throughout the day. In the convention center, where the votes were being cast, there was national news coverage from all over the country because nobody knew which way the election was going to go. It was pretty close, and Philadelphia was considered to be, and turned out to be, the pivot point for Pennsylvania, which was a crucial state. So there was news coverage all over the place. People still mostly wearing masks. A lot of people voting by mail at that point, but you know how the election went. And then things started to look up. In December, the city approved the construction by restaurants of the outdoor eating areas, which we're all so familiar with now. This was in December of 2020 when they started being erected. And they went up pretty quickly in lots of restaurants. And by December 3rd, when I took this was outside Park Restaurant. It was in the evening and things were up and running. They just removed that the other day. It's been up ever since. I think because they had another set of booths like this on the other side of the restaurant. Something happened. A fire started there a couple of weeks ago, and it burnt the outdoor seating area to the ground. And they've now taken this one down. I don't know if they'll be back up or not. Finally, in February, there's a jump here between November of 2020 and February of 2021, because I had hip surgery during that time. So I wasn't out photographing anything. But by February 27th, people were out and around. Many were wearing masks. It was early spring, and Rittenhouse Square was jumping. On a nice day, it just couldn't be busier. And things like this happened. In the middle of everybody, this guy got down on his knee. He handed a ring to his girlfriend. He asked her to marry him. She agreed. Everybody cheered. Everybody took pictures. It was the first sign of uplifting life in the city in over a year and a half. And then the vaccine arrived and started to be administered. And this was at University of Pennsylvania Hospital on, I forget what the day was, March 4th. And I was there. That's me getting my first COVID shot. And I think I'm up to my 5th booster now. But it was a godsend. It changed the world, despite all the people who denied that, it was legitimate. Now, what happened was, we're up into April here. Derek Chauvin, the police officer out in Minneapolis, who was on trial for having killed George Floyd. The trial was over. The verdict was going to be announced that day, April 20th. And nobody knew what the verdict was going to be. Nobody in the city knew what was going to happen if it was not guilty. The police basically surrounded City Hall. They were out there just in case. And as you know, he was convicted. Things were peaceful. No more rioting. Now, the last group of photos that I have are from September of 2021. You may recall on September 2nd, the city experienced flooding like it had never seen before. If you're familiar with the Schuylkill Path that runs along the river, it runs underneath these street lamps, and the freight railroad tracks run along back here. And that morning, the water was roaring by there at 20 or 30 miles an hour. It was inundated. These posts are probably 12 feet high. That's how high the water was there. And this is Cherry Street, not far from there, about 4 blocks from the river. This is 22nd and Arch, 23rd Street. The water just really inundated everything within a quarter mile of it. Kelly Drive, if you know that sculpture park along Kelly Drive, totally underwater. And we remember the Vine Street Canal. So this was it. It was amazing how the water, this is looking the other direction, and the expressway here comes into Vine Street and goes down underneath, and that's what flooded. The water came up from around the river back here and flooded it. And it was that way for a couple of days. This is my last photo, and this is amazing. This is the very next day, and the water disappeared. These are the lampposts that were underwater, and this is the path that was underwater. Not only did it disappear, but it didn't even leave much mud behind. I was out there that day on my bike. People were jogging and walking. There were some volunteers shoveling up mud in some places, but not much. Even this walkway to the boat dock wasn't swept away. I don't know how, but it wasn't. Now, that's the last of my photographs. I've continued this project, though, ever since. I just go all over the city and photograph whatever I happen to come on, the good stuff, the bad stuff. I've been to every neighborhood in the city. I've photographed it. I've photographed, 100 and some of the wonderful murals around the city. There are memorials, wonderful memorials that people don't even realize exist. Down along Columbus Boulevard, there is a Korean War memorial. There's a Vietnam memorial. Big, very, very beautifully done and informative memorials. I started photographing all of this stuff as I was going around. I'm not going to do it tonight. Tonight I was focusing on the pandemic. But the city always has something interesting to show me. The way people decorate their houses in Halloween is really wonderful. And Christmas and the stores. I took an interesting set of photographs, which can't do today, was the cleanup after the Mummers Parade. You don't think about what happens after the parade. And it is a mess. But what was really nice is there were dozens of mummers still in their costumes who had come back to the starting place, and they were helping to clean up everything. So I'm still doing this. I totaled up the other day. Since I started doing this in March of 2020 until last week, I've posted on 256 different days, usually 6-7 photos a day. Sometimes if things are really worth photographing, I'll do 2 postings a day. But I'm continuing to do it. It opens my eyes to things around me that we don't normally see in all the neighborhoods in the city. And people ask me, do I feel safe riding around on a bicycle in North Philly and in Gray's Ferry and in West Philly, where the night before 3 people were shot? This sounds naive, but during the daytime, none of these places are threatening. I've been through them. I have a fancy bike. Nobody has bothered me. Nobody. One time, one lady, an elderly woman, said, "You better be careful around here." And I said, "Thank you." But I have, and I try to keep a clear eye about what's going on around me. I've never felt threatened. I've never seen any violence. I wouldn't go there after dark in many of these places, but during the day, they're interesting neighborhoods with people living lives and trying to just make the best of things. And it's been fascinating. I just want to close with a little commercial here. I do have a website in which I've posted a lot of photography from my trips around the world, as well as Philadelphia scenes. If you're interested, it's Ben Zuck Photography, BENZUCK photography.com. If you would be interested in getting on my list of people to whom I send these postings every couple days, you can just send me an email and I will add your name to the list. And anytime you don't want to hear it and see it anymore, you just tell me stop and I'll stop. My email is bzuck, BZUCK 220 @gmail.com. And that is the end of my commercial, for which I get paid nothing. But I love doing it and I love sharing it. So any questions or comments, go for it.
Your talk really goes with what I'm trying to do with 1 hour once a month. Inspire people. Your work was so amazing. We really my husband and I had to really kind of hibernate during the whole COVID thing. It was a very, very strange time for us. And and but being able to look at what was going on in the city while we were truly, the word is hibernating.
Yeah.
We were scared to death to basically leave the house. And so it was just an amazing presentation. And thank you so much.
I
There are some texts, there are some messages coming up, some chats.
Okay.
If Adkins said very
I've got a
Yeah,
question.
Ben, this is John Stritzinger. It's really in the news right now because it's almost exactly 4 years from when the
Yeah.
shutdown all began, as you had your first image from March 17th, I think it was, you said. And so I was just, I've been thinking about, my wife and I have been talking about what was it like back then? What do we remember? Those first few days, we were planning to visit friends in Florida and we canceled our trip. We weren't going to get on a plane and everything just so changed. And, particularly being able to see things right in Center City. I used to work in Center City, and so seeing some of those scenes when I was never down there, and you were living there is really remarkable to capture that, So it's kind of reminding me of what we would see in the Inquirer. I would be, getting the newspaper in the morning and see photographs like that, that would show what had just taken place or how things looked. So it was really great to see that, and I appreciated the quality of your imagery, that, you took some time to try to include someone in the image or to, make a particular, angle work very nicely so we could see what was there in a way that worked. So thank you.
Thank you.
Ben, got a question. And by the way, following up on the the comments that were just made by John, I think this is an extraordinary documentary. I think it's terrific. Um, and hand it to you for actually sticking with it through not only through the pandemic, but since the pandemic, um, riding around Philadelphia and documenting Philadelphia. I think that's really a good project. The question I have is on the pictures you took on the day of the George Floyd riot, where everybody was out of control, breaking windows and whatnot. You were entering an area that was cordoned off. And I was wondering, did the police say anything to you? How did you sort of navigate through that?
Actually, I was out there the next morning. I wasn't out there while the rioting was happening.
Uh,
And the next morning, the police didn't stop anybody from doing anything, as you could see from the looters. So there were people walking up and down the streets. There were a lot of other people with cameras. And the police were just kind of standing around and things were being stolen. It was mind-boggling. And nobody was going to stop in and try to stop somebody with an armful of stuff. But the police were kind of hands off.
and the day of the flood, were you riding your bike around in the flood?
But I was in elevated places. Yes. But I was going wherever I could until I hit a place where there was water. Then I'd go somewhere else. The bridges over the Schuylkill were full of people with cameras.
Hmm.
It was wall-to-wall cameras. But yeah, I was able to get around a lot that day. Just the places within 4 or 5 blocks of either side of the river were flooded.
Those pictures are really quite impressive.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to put a plug in for something, by the way. Um, I'm a major fan of the mural arts program. And if you start to look, as I do now, whenever I'm riding, just look to your left or your right or down a little side street. Philadelphia has over 4,000 murals. No city in the world comes close. And they are really well done. So as I said, I photographed, I think 167 of them so far, and new ones keep popping up. So I just want to put in my plug for the mural arts program. You can donate to them. I have nothing to do with them, but they have an online site to donate to them. They really take places that are, empty lots strewn with bottles and things, and they spruce them up and they fix them up, and they get the neighbors involved in working on the design and painting. It's a wonderful place, wonderful organization, as well as a lot of other things we're seeing. The outdoor public art in Philadelphia is all over the place. There are memorials, there are statues, there are sculptures all over the place. It's just a question of, if you're going slow enough and you're on a bike and you're looking around, it's easy to see them all.
Hmm.
I think you're muted, Eileen. You're still muted.
Eileen, you're muted.
Ben? Yeah, Ben,
There
can
you
I
go.
say something? Can you see me? I don't know.
You're muted,
You're
Eileen.
okay now. We can hear you, I think.
There you go.
Yeah.
Doing it. There. Thank you. Okay, it's the Isaiah Zager stuff with the glass works,
Oh, yeah.
especially down around the Old City, and his work is just spreading out and spreading out and spreading out. And when you think, what a way to deal with recycling, it was just his stuff is amazing to me
Yes.
too.
I've
Every
taken a
little,
lot of photos too.
every little alleyway. It's like, phew, well,
Yeah.
Oh, Ben, you need to be the next mayor of Philadelphia. You are such a lover and tell such good stories. You would be a great inspiration for our city.
Well, that would be an immediate way for me to become ineffective.
I love the way you tell your stories. They're terrific. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
And they're beautiful too.
I'm really surprised that you didn't get the "what camera do you use" question.
I knew that was going to come up. And
Yeah.
I think I started doing this when I had my I switched to Sony mirrorless cameras from my Nikons, and I was using an A6000 and an A6300. In the last 2 years, I would say that 99% of my photos have been taken with my iPhone. And that may be blasphemy in this group, but it takes photographs. I'm not trying to win art contests. I'm not trying to edit them into something that they're not. It takes wonderful photographs. And there, even in the camera, there's editing as well as on your computer, which it doesn't need much. So I actually just gave away 3 old cameras that I haven't used in years. And I still have my Sony, and I'm not sure when I'm going to pull it out next. But I would say half of these pictures were taken with the camera, and at least half were taken with, I had an iPhone 10 for a while, now I have an iPhone 15. The second half of what you've seen are all iPhones.
I think if we go back and we think about photography, it's not what you use to capture the image. It's that you've captured an image that just speaks for itself.
Amen to that.
That's what it's about. Any more questions? I am super, super thankful for your presentation, because it just showed us things that just a lot of us didn't see. I kept using that word hibernating. What happened, John was 88 years old. He had a fantastic barber shop. He was training women barbers. Everything was going along really great. And all of a sudden, John had the barbershop had to close because of the pandemic, and John had to retire. And yeah, it was and I'm sure that all of us have experienced that boom, boom. We're we're into hibernation mode. And I'm just really thankful that you were not hibernating and that you were able to just show us exactly what the city was like then. And it was just amazing. It's really it's an excellent documentary of what it was like those years. Those years just went boom so quick. They're gone. They're gone. Like what were we doing all those years? Wearing masks, trying to stay healthy. It just, yeah. But
And we were doing this, we were Zooming.
we were, yes, and that was one of the really, really good things that that kind of happened from this, was that we were able to stay in contact. We were able to share photography. and encourage photography, which is my goal.
And you do a great job.
And if I can do a pluggy plug for, yeah, thank you. For next month,
Mhm.
Brandon Zimmerman, he really researched and he researched and he researched an area of photography that, I mean, I kind of knew it existed because in part of my career, I was asked to photograph bodies at funeral homes because there was going to be a funeral and the relatives would not be able to view the casket once the casket was closed, and they went, and I kind of, as a medical photographer, people thought I was really qualified to do that. And also at Cooper Hospital, they had a program where they did memorials for families to view the picture of the child that had passed away.
Mhm.
And so again, you know, oh, she's a medical photographer, she can do this. They were some of the hardest photographs that I had to do. And so in reading, Brandon published this book. It just got published. Dissection photography, realizing that it was a form of photography that from the 1830s became a way of sharing, capture. I don't know so much sharing, maybe capturing images. And the fact that he found these images, that's what's like amazing to me. He found them. He found, you know, what film they were on. It's just amazing. It was just amazing. And talking to just the theory of why people were taking these images. Part of it was like a very what I would call funny, kind of gross. Why would you do that? But then again, it was, yeah, his book is amazing, and his talk should be really, really good. So save the date, April 16th. We'll all have paid our taxes, ready to move on. So anybody else, or are we going to say good night and sweet dreams? Yes. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Sweet dreams.
Yeah.
Everyone stay healthy and take pictures, please.
Good night. Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Night.
Thank you.